Hi, I'm Craig, and I help veterans go from feeling stuck and unseen after service to living with confidence, connection, and purpose so that they can thrive in civilian life and relationships. Hey everybody, today we're going to talk about the VA's duty to assist, or the VA's duty to get federal records for you, the veteran. And so sit back, relax, and let me walk you through this process of the VA's duty to assist you in getting your federal and medical records for submitting your claim. Now, once you file a complete claim, whether it's an initial or supplemental claim, the VA is required to obtain federal records. Okay, they have this requirement from that they're directed by federal law to help you obtain federal records. The federal records include your service treatment records. These are service treatment records from the military. They also include your personnel records. That means all of your records that contain your duty stations, records that contain your military occupational specialties, your ratings and ranks, all of those things, your award files, all of the correspondence that had to do with you administratively in the military. The VA has a duty to help you obtain those records as well in the relationship with the DoD. And then VA medical records, including vet center records, the VA has a responsibility to help you obtain those as well. Social Security records, which is an interesting one. Any Social Security records that you have that have to have your Social Security information from the Social Security Administration, the VA is responsible to help you obtain those records as well, because those records, particularly for veterans who have filed for Social Security disability benefits, those records will help the VA to make their determination on some decisions concerning your medical conditions. And then Public Health Service and Department of Labor records, also for the same reason that the SSA records will be helpful to the VA. Public Health Service and Department of Labor records are also records that the VA has the duty to assist you to find. And they must make reasonable efforts to get them until the records are obtained, meaning the VA has them in their possession to send to you, or it's reasonably certain that they don't exist, or that trying to get those records would be more futile than trying not to get those records. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. Here's an example of the VA's duty to assist. If the VA gets a DD form 2963 at discharge, that's formal certification that STRs, or service treatment records, are complete. So a lot of people, I want to talk about the DD form 2963. A lot of people don't know about this. This is a form that kind of lets the VA off the hook, so to speak. And it's a form that the VA will fill out, that will be placed in the record, that says we've done everything we can to try to find this service member's record and we can't find it. So this is part of their duty to assist. This is part of kind of what they do to show people, hey, listen, like we tried to find a record, there was nothing we could do, or we did everything that we could do under the DoD instruction, and we just can't find these records for this particular individual. So that's a D Form 2963, and this is how it looks. It'll be a service treatment record certification, and it'll say in there the information is for official use only. Look at Block 4, where the certification block is, that some official will sign from the VA, and it will say a thorough review of all known DoD or United States Coast Guard systems as appropriate has been accomplished as directed by DoD Instruction 6040.6045. As such, other than records being enclosed herein, meaning they have to enclose what they actually do find, and sometimes that may be nothing. It has been concluded that no further records exist for the service member, and the service treatment record is complete as of the certification date of this form. In the event additional documentation is discovered, it will be immediately made available to the VA for utilization in potential claims processing. All right. If the separating member has served less than 180 days, enter entry level separation in the comment area below. A lot of people don't know about the DD Form 2963. It states that we've done everything we could possibly do to find this service member's record, and we can't find it. That's a joint statement from the DoD, and it's the VA's out to say, hey, did everything we could to find it, and we cannot locate this record. I want to tell you a little something about that, and that's just it's a little personal story of mine. I did another video about record retention, and I will tell you this: my record before there were electronic records, my record was misplaced by the Marine Corps, and when it was time for me to discharge, they didn't have my medical record for whatever reason. I'm not exactly sure what happened. Perhaps it got lost in the packing up, because we used to go in the field and stuff a lot. So perhaps it got lost. We had a traveling corpsman that was always accompanied us, right? So perhaps it got lost in that process. But I try to practice what I preach, and I don't even know back then. I must have gotten some guidance from an older Marine, or someone who I knew who was in the service, who really kind of knew the game. And they told me, hey, make a copy of everything, keep a copy of your records. And so it just so happened that I had a copy of my military treatment record from the Marine Corps when I got in the Navy, after I took a break, got in the Navy, and I had those records. And I used those records because I had the Navy obviously reconstructed once they put everything electronic, which I think was, they moved to electronic records in around like late 90s, early 2000s. So I was able to get those records included, but it was only because I had a copy of the service treatment record. If I didn't have a copy of the service treatment record, some of the things on my claim that I submitted once I retired would not have been added for compensation. So just a good tip. When you see this DD Form 2963, it means, that's close to the death knell in the coffin of them trying to find your records. So what's the veteran's role in federal record retrieval? Well, veterans must cooperate by naming the agency that holds the records. So you got to give the VA and the DoD the information that they need to figure out what agency holds that record, what medical treatment facility. Give a time frame for when they were created. So you'll say, hey, I believe I went to medical around this time, during this particular era of my career, and I was seen for this particular thing, right? And then, briefly describe what the treatment event was for. Kind of talked about that. I went in for pseudofolliculitis barbae, which is PFB, shaving, or I went in for knee sprain, or I went in for ankle sprain. You want to describe exactly what that event was for, and you want to submit any necessary release forms so that the VA can have authorization to get those records for you. All right. For example, if you want Vet Center records, you'll need to submit VA Forms 21 TAC 4142 and 4142 Alpha, and there'll be a link to those forms in the description. I want you to take a look at this slide, though, real quick, and I want you to tell me what's familiar, right? We've been talking about building. I did another video about building your record when it doesn't exist, to try to submit a VA claim, particularly when you've gone through something, or when you've experienced some sort of medical event or trauma. This looks a lot like what you need to do to put that together. You need to name the agency that holds the records. That could be a hospital, military treatment facility, private medical facility, whatever. Give a time frame for when they were created, right? So this would be like your own little certification statement. You want to briefly describe what the treatment event was for, and then submit release forms, right? But you wouldn't submit release forms if you were doing this. Well, you would submit release forms if you were doing this to obtain records. But like if you were trying to reconstruct your record, you do all of that except submitting release forms. Those are the things that you would need to know as you put together this history of your medical concerns and your medical treatment, right, while in the military. So a lot of these things you'll see are cyclical. A lot of these things you'll see are repeating, because it goes back to the basic idea. you need some level of documented evidence that you can prove that you went through something or that something happened. And you take all these pieces of the puzzle and you put them together, right? And you build a narrative for submitting a claim that is um, submitting a claim that will be beneficial to you and that will be favorable for you. So, want to always keep that in mind when you are submitting things. Okay. What's next? What about private records that you need to get right a hold of? Private records. The VA must try to get private records, non-federal records, if you identify. This is what the veteran must identify: where they are, what the provider name is, um, what they're for. Now, these are private records. These aren't military records from a military treatment facility while you were in. These are private records. Okay. The VA sends release forms so that they can request them. And reasonable efforts means one initial request. I want y'all to check this out. One follow up, unless they say the records don't exist. And another try will be futile. Remember, we were talking earlier about that. Okay. But you are ultimately responsible if the VA can't get a hold of those records. All right. All right. Well, wait a minute. Let's go back for a second. All right. You have to talk about where the provider, you know, where they are, whatever the name of the hospital is and what they're for. Now, when we're talking about private medical records, one thing to note is the way things are now, particularly for the veterans that are getting out now, or the way private medical records are done, the way things are now is you should be able to reasonably get an electronic copy of your record fairly easily, because everything is going to like my record online, those kinds of things. So private medical records, it should be much easier to get that. What happens is you go to the doctor, and make sure when you go to the doctor, you're being seen for something that has to do with your service-connected injuries. You go to the doctor, you get seen at the doctor, it goes directly on that electronic health record. And then you can literally go on an app and get that record. You can either print records off from a copy of that app, or if you want to go in and talk to the doctor or talk to the receptionist or administrative person about getting those records, you can do that as well. And the VA just must make a reasonable effort to request your records that are applicable to your claim. All right, one initial request, one follow-up, unless they say the records don't exist, or another try would be futile. But I want you to look at that last bullet. You are ultimately responsible if the VA cannot get your records. So what about third-party records? Can the VA request third-party records? The VA can request third-party records only if the following conditions are met. If the third-party records are relevant to your case or to your claim, if they help your case, meaning if the VA knows that this is going to actually assist and help your case, or you've determined along with the VA that these third-party records are going to actually help your case, then they can request third-party records. If the third party will likely agree to the release of information or agree to giving the VA that info, then they can request them. But the VA will not go after your records if it will cause conflict, if the person might not consent. The VA may reach out and ask them, and if they suspect that this person may not consent to releasing, then they won't go after those third-party records. And then if you're just speculating that the third-party records might exist, you don't really know for sure, but you're just grasping at straws, the VA won't go after those records. And the VA won't get a court order for third-party records, because getting a court order for third-party records is beyond the VA's scope of a duty. They're not authorized to go into the courts on your behalf and get any kind of records. Now, we need to talk about what happens when the VA isn't able to get those records. If the VA can't get those federal or private records, medical records, then they got to tell you these things. They got to tell you what they tried to get. They got to tell you how they tried to get those records. That they'll move forward based on the evidence that they have, and that you are ultimately responsible. Okay. This applies under 38 CFR 3.159E, which we'll go over in just a moment. And then if it's private records, they may also notify you during their last attempt to get those private records. Okay. So let's talk about 38 CFR 3.159E. You know, the way we do things on this channel is we don't just come out of the side of our neck. We don't just talk out of the side of our butt. We actually say, this is where we got the information for how to adjudicate and what the VA looks at for these claims. So we're going to go into the 38 CFR. I'm going to pull it up on the screen here and show you how it looks. It says, this is the VA's duty to notify claimant of inability to obtain records. We're going to go through this very briefly. If the VA makes reasonable efforts to obtain relevant non-federal records, but is unable to obtain them, or after continued efforts to obtain federal records concludes it is reasonably certain they do not exist, or further efforts to obtain them would be futile. This is what we talked about in some previous slides. VA will provide the claimant with oral or written notice of that fact. The VA will make a record of any oral notice conveyed to the claimant. For non-federal record requests, pay attention. VA may provide the notice at the same time it makes its final attempt to obtain the relevant records. In either case, the notice must contain the following information: the identity of the records VA was unable to obtain, meaning like they'll tell you which records they weren't able to get, an explanation of the efforts that the VA made to obtain the records. Remember, they got to tell you what they tried to do to get them, all these kinds of things, right? A description of any further action the VA will take regarding the claim, including but not limited to notice the VA will decide the claim based on the evidence of record, unless the claimant submits the records VA was unable to obtain. Meaning they're going to use the evidence that they already have, unless you come up with something that they were trying to look for. Let's say you come across it, right? Let's say you dig, you contact some people, you're able to kind of unearth those records. Now it's like, oh, we've got new evidence. You can send it to the VA, shoot it to them, submit it to them, and then they'll take care of the new evidence that you have. And then I noticed that the claimant is ultimately responsible for providing the evidence. Listen, I was talking to a friend a couple of weeks ago, and he said, well, the VA is responsible for making sure you have everything that you need, and the VSOs are there to, and I'm like, that's true. That should be true. But this 38 CFR 3.159E section 4 states that the VA will give a notice to the claimant that after all of these actions are done, you're ultimately responsible for providing that level of evidence. And we'll talk a lot about what evidence means and what evidentiary support is. But you have to be able to, the burden of proof still lies on the veteran to convince the VA that they actually went through that information in light of not having any evidence. Okay. And then the second part says if the VA becomes aware of the existence of relevant records before deciding the claim, the VA will notify the claimant of the records and request that the claimant provide the release for records. If the claimant does not provide any necessary release of the relevant records that VA is unable to obtain, the VA will request that the claimant obtain the records and provide them to the VA. So this is just going to be a paper trail back and forth between you and the VA, right? Until somebody can come up with something that says that this condition existed for you, or there is a record of this condition on your behalf. All right. Listen, I know this is a lot of information, but I want to look in this camera and speak to all my veterans out there. Okay. You got to remember, they do have a legal duty to assist, but I've said this so many times on this channel. You are your own best advocate. When I did my video about the 5 ways to stay, 5 warning signs for VA claim companies, which you can find in this playlist, you can find on my channel, I talked about the fact that you are your own best advocate. Nobody will fight for your VA benefits like you will. We're going to do a lot of things on this channel to help you because I want to help veterans get the benefits that they deserve. There's a lot of smoke and mirrors out there. There are a lot of people talking, making a lot of empty promises, but that's not what we do here. I really want to help, and we really want to help you get the benefits you deserve. So just remember, you are your own best advocate. You're intelligent. Um, you are capable. You're competent. You're gifted. You're talented. You served your country, and you deserve to stand in there and fight for what for the benefits that are due to you. And we're going to help you do that. Know what they should be doing and hold them accountable. Know what the VA should be doing and hold them accountable. You won't be able to do that unless you have the knowledge to do that. We're going to try to provide that for you. And if you need help navigating this or any part of your VA claim, Royal Rock Counseling and Consulting is here for you. That's my email address. And just so you know, we are not just pulling this out of thin air. These are the references that we used for this particular video. And one of the things that I am going to do as my duty to you, my fellow veterans, is to make sure that I always give you where I get the information from. These are legal authorized sources where we're getting this information from. I got some really good sort of surprises for you guys that I think are really going to uncover and open up what you need to do your VA claims. And so I think if you continue to follow this channel, you're going to really be you're going to benefit from it, and you'll be glad you did. We're going to do more work around helping veterans find their medical records, helping them retrieve medical records, whether that be private medical records or federal medical records. Just stick around, stay tuned to this channel, and I'll try to do the very best that I can to get you all the help that you need. So I want everybody to have a great day, and always remember, live royally and live well. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.